All right, peace and greetings, YouTubers. So welcome to another edition of In the News. Let's just jump right into it. Now, I have to start out with that really big 5-alarm fire that took place in Alexandria last weekend. The only reason I'm telling this story is because I was literally right there as it was happening. It was the craziest thing. So it was a Saturday, and it was about 9-something in the morning. And at the time, I was actually working. I was taking some of my teenagers to an event in DC. And so we're in the company little bus. I'm actually driving a whole bus. When you run the community center, they give you the nice little bus that's like a 13, 14, 15 passenger bus. So I'm driving a bus with the teenagers on it. And so we're on Route 1, and I see, like, off in the distance, maybe about half a mile up the road, this little plume of smoke. Just a little plume of smoke, and, it didn't seem like anything major. So I was like, oh, maybe there's a car on fire or something like that. Hopefully they're able to rescue whoever that is quickly. And so we're driving, and we're on Route 1, and the thing about Route 1 is that, or at least this specific section of Route 1, which, by the way, is this road that runs from Maine all the way to Florida, but in this specific section of, like, Fairfax County, Virginia, there's a traffic light every 4 or 5 blocks, so you keep stopping. So it takes a minute just to go half a mile. And so as we keep getting closer to where the smoke is supposed to be, the smoke keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so it gets to a point where I'm looking and I'm like, that smoke plume is a little too big to just be a car. It has to be maybe a house or, maybe a restaurant. Because I was like, it can't be a house because there's not really any houses right here. So it must be one of the restaurants. But then I was thinking, like, well, the Outback and the TGI Friday and Chili's and all those places, they don't usually open till like 11. It's only 9-something, so it can't be a kitchen fire. I didn't know what it was. So we're driving, and then literally you can't tell what it is until you're almost at the fire. And so we literally get to the red light to where this fire is, and there's this big giant apartment that's under construction, and the whole thing is up in flames. And mind you, it was like a new fire. It had just started. It had only been going for a handful of minutes because there were only 1 or 2 fire trucks there at the time. The rest of the fire trucks were still on the way, and the building, like the fire, kept getting bigger and bigger. The scary part was that we were at a red light. And so here's the visual. There's the big giant fire, there's 3 lanes, a quick median, and then there's me in this bus with some teenagers. And I couldn't move over to the other lanes because all the cars are stopped at the red light, so I just have to kind of sit there. And it was the craziest thing because the light would not change. Like, it literally just sat there for 2 minutes. I'm like, okay. And I was contemplating, like, should I just gun it and run through the light? Because literally the fire keeps growing, the wind is blowing, the smoke is starting to come, like, towards the bus. You can feel the heat from the fire, by the way. It's that hot, and the fire keeps growing at the same time. The entire building was all wooden, minus the frame and the bottom level, which I don't know why you'd build like a wooden high-rise apartment in 2020. Just fire codes. I don't know what the plan was, if they're gonna put firewalls in later or what, but bad idea. And so I'm watching this fire get bigger and bigger and bigger, even as we're sitting there. And I'm like, man, and like I done told the teenagers, like, close the windows. And I'm trying to think, like, should I just gun it through the light? But I can't gun it because there's traffic going the opposite way and I don't want to get T-boned. And then I was like, you know what, F this, because we're about to sit in this bus and suffocate. So I was like, you know what, if the light doesn't change in the next 30 seconds, we're going to gun it and run it. And so just as it was getting to that like 15-second mark, the light finally changes. And I'm trying to zoom it through, but I forgot we driving a bus. So of course, the bus don't got no zoom to it. So we just trotting along, but it was crazy. I remember, like, when we actually got to DC, you could still see the fire from DC. It was huge. And so it turns out that the fire started because one of the construction workers had like a cigarette that they just threw out, and I guess they didn't discard it properly, and so it landed on something and just caught on, and it was crazy. It took us like an hour to get back after our event because the entire road was closed on both sides. Like, you had to just keep doing detours. It took forever to get my kids back to where they were from, but it was crazy. It was kind of, I don't know. I just feel like if you're gonna build like a high-rise, I feel like the firewall should already be there. Like, if you saw the building, the whole thing was just wooden. I thought that was kind of crazy. And if you remember on this channel, I told you about the time my neighbor set their apartment on fire making fries. And thank God that, this building has firewalls. But I just remember when I came in my hallway and they were talking about help, fire. And I remember I ran right past the apartment that was on fire to my apartment to grab my laptop because my album wasn't finished yet. And I didn't have everything in the cloud. So I was like, nope, I worked too hard on this, so I will go down with this album. But absolutely crazy. But yeah, $43 million in damage. I feel like everybody got fired that day. Absolutely crazy. Anyway, moving on. Have you guys seen this story about the woman who got kicked off the plane because she was giving the woman with the crying baby a hard time? All right, let's go to the video.
The governor, and I said someone else, I'll come back to my dinner. I'm not sitting here crying.
He's not going to cry the whole time.
We can put you on the next flight. What? We can put you on the next flight. No, I can't. I have to. Then you will sit right here in 1980. How about your name? Right here. What's your name? Tabitha 9766. Thank you, Tabitha. You may not have a job tomorrow. I want this lady to come.
No, I can't.
No, I want you off my flight.
I can't, Tabitha.
want
I
you
have to. I apologize. Please. I apologize.
All right, then.
I apologize. I have to. Thank you,
You
Tabitha.
were screaming at the beginning.
I'm not screaming. I'm being quiet now, please. Okay, I'm sorry. I was really stressed out.
Now Perez's name and image have been removed from the council's official website, and she's been placed on a leave of absence.
I really do love a good story about karma. You see what happens when you're nasty to people unnecessarily. You see how things just come around full circle and come back to bite. Foolery at its finest. That's exactly what she gets. And it's so funny because you watched her energy literally shift the minute she found out she wasn't going to be on that flight anymore. Because, you know, just 2 seconds earlier when she was talking all that trash and she wanted badge numbers and names and, oh, you about to be fired. You ain't going to have a job by tomorrow because I'm about to handle it. And you got handled. And out of nowhere, you watch that energy shift, even the facial expressions, her voice, the tone changing. No, I can't. No, I have to go. It's okay, Tabitha. No, I'm sorry. I apologize. No. Keep that same energy. Get off and walk. And if you're going across the Atlantic, swim. I tell you to get on a ship, but they got all of those quarantined right now because of coronavirus, so you might be stuck wherever you're going. There's no need to be so nasty to people, especially on like planes or people who work in public service. That's one thing that gets under my skin when people are really nasty to folks who work at like the drive-thru or at a restaurant or something like that, especially if they've been nothing but cordial. There's no reason to ever be like just that nasty to somebody. It's just unnecessary. But the thing I found interesting with the woman who got kicked off the plane, we've talked about this before, but when I always talk about punitive entitlement, where people are so entitled that if they feel inconvenienced, they want everybody else to be inconvenienced as well. So her way of doing that was by threatening to take away the flight attendant's job because she thought she had that kind of power, just because she didn't want to sit next to a crying baby. And the flight attendant did give her the option to find, whatever seat was available, which I guess is the seat that was across. That's all that was there. But why are you opening your mouth to talk about, you're going to get this woman fired when, she's doing everything in her capacity that she's supposed to do? You bought the ticket, and unfortunately, you don't have a choice with who's going to be sitting next to you, but it is what it is. The flight attendant did her part, so why are you being so nasty with the attitude, talking about getting Tabitha fired? Tabitha said, not today, not on my watch, not 37,000 feet up. You just going to get off. And so it was interesting just to watch that energy change, the way she just, the voice, the tone, everything. I said, see, y'all got to stop being so nasty to people. And then it's almost like, there's already a special place in my heart for people who have like babies and toddlers, because it can already be a stressful experience when you have to take them in public because you never know how they're going to act or respond at the time. I remember when my younger brother was born, he was sick for the first few months of his life, so he cried a lot. Like literally the only time he wasn't crying was when he was asleep. Even when he used to eat, he'd be crying. Like you'd be giving him the bottle, he'd like spit the bottle out to cry some more, and then you try to give him the bottle. Like, man, he just hollered and hollered everywhere we went, so we couldn't go anywhere. Like you go to church, he'd be in there hollering, which I understood because we was in there too long, but he'd be just in there hollering. You couldn't go to a restaurant because you didn't want to disturb everybody there. I remember we flew to LA one time. He cried the whole flight, like a 2.5 hour flight from Seattle to LA. The whole time, just hollered. And I remember like, y'all, I remember when he first arrived, I was like, Mom, y'all can take him back. I changed my mind. Because at the time, I wanted like 10 brothers and sisters because I thought it was going to be a cool thing. I was going to have like 10 girls and 10 boys, and we were going to be an army. And so when the first brother came, he started doing all that hollering. I'm like, I'm good. We can just get a dog. We can just get a dog. But I just remember what it felt like being in all those places and people staring at us or, requesting that you go somewhere else. And then on top of that, I had a cousin that was special needs. And so every now and then she'd have a moment in public and people would stare and, that judgmental look. So you should never make a parent feel guilty for being a parent. You know what I mean? Jacked up. And so I got a kick out of watching old girl get kicked off the plane. That made my day. That's exactly what you get. Stop being so nasty to people. It's something about folks on a plane. They just get, I don't know, people get on a plane and swear that the world revolves around them. Like, I don't know if you saw this story from a few days ago where there was the two people that were on the plane, and really the beef should have been with the airline, not with each other, because these these airlines, they keep stuffing everybody on these planes by trying to squeeze in as many seats as they can, and everybody's in there bunched up. And this is the one time that I appreciate having a smaller frame, because I usually don't have too much of a problem on planes. Mine is having long legs and long feet. But I don't know if you saw that story, but there's the guy who's sitting in the very back row and his seat can't recline, but the woman in front of him, her seat can, and she reclines back and he can't stand it. And she was nice enough to, sit back up so he could eat, but when he was done eating, she went back to reclining and he was pissed off, so he just kind of punched her seat the whole time, the whole flight. I was like, really? I don't think he would have did that if there was a man sitting in the seat. And if it was a black guy sitting in the seat, I really don't think he would have done it. Even if it was a black woman in the seat, I don't think he would have tried it. Like, I think people know who they can test and who they can't. But I found that really interesting because everybody was divided on that. A lot of people were saying, oh, well, you should have a common courtesy to ask if you're allowed to recline your seat on the plane. I was like, y'all are being real wishy-washy about manners on the plane, because y'all don't say anything when y'all see these people put them nasty bare feet with no socks on the leg rest and everything like that. Like, people want to smell that. Like, absolutely not. So we're not going to sit here and act like all of a sudden you need permission to recline the seat that you paid for. Really, the beef is with the airline. Stop stuffing everybody in these planes. But anyway, interesting. So that should be a lesson. Stop being so nasty to people who work in public service. And then I got a chance to see the photograph. I thought it was okay. You know, we went and we saw one of those really, really late shows. Because, you know, like, if the movie comes out on a Friday, you can see one of those 10:30 shows on the Thursday before. And I thought it was okay. I really liked the score. Like, I liked the musical arrangements. Whoever was the actress that played Issa Rae's mother, she did a phenomenal job. I really enjoyed watching her. I thought Lakeith did a great job as well. You know, the movie was cool. What I did appreciate was that there really wasn't any trauma. I'm like, finally, we at least get one movie where nobody got to die a crazy death and the police ain't got to shoot nobody in the head or nothing like that. So I did appreciate that aspect. I thought the plot was okay. It was just an okay. I wasn't crazy over it, but I didn't dislike it. It was just a movie for me that was there. I wanted to at least support it. So I'd say go check it out for yourself and make your own verdict on it. But I enjoyed it. You know, it was cool for what it was. So yeah, that was the photograph. I want to switch gears here. If you remember last spring, we talked about a series of black churches that had been mysteriously burned down in the late hours of the night, 2 and 3 in the morning. They just randomly caught fire. And these were churches that had been around for more than a century. They were pillars in the black community, and they all just kept mysteriously being burned down. And so finally, there's a few answers that have been put into play. There's an individual named Holden Matthews who pled guilty to burning these churches down. Now, I want to read some details because they're very just, you read it and you're like, what? So listen to this. During his plea hearing, because he also just pled guilty, was like, yeah, I did it. It is what it is. During his plea hearing in the United States District Court in Lafayette, Louisiana, Mr. Matthews said he had targeted these buildings because of their religious character, according to the statement. Mr. Matthews, an aficionado of black metal, a subgenre of heavy metal, said he was copying similar crimes committed in Norway in the 1990s in an attempt to elevate his status among the black metal community, whose most extreme practitioners engaged in church burning, vandalism, and killings. Now, what I do want to clear up is black metal, they're not talking about like black people who are fans of metal music. No, it's actually just called black metal, and these are the people who they put on like the dark, crazy makeup and everything like that. That's what it is. So it's not to be confused with black individuals who like metal music, because they do exist. One additional detail is that he's also the son of a sheriff's deputy. I said, all kind of puzzle pieces just coming together, huh? Just all kind of things. So he's facing 10 to 70 years, and I'm like, throw the book at him. And the piece that gets me that I find interesting is that, they marketed this, or not marketed this, but they labeled this a hate crime in regards to the fact that they were religious institutions that were burned down, but they didn't address the element of race, which I find interesting because it's not like he just went and burned down any old churches. He went and burned down black churches because he didn't even live on this side of town. He could have went and burned down the church in his neighborhood. He went to the side where black folks live and burned their stuff up. And so I think I take issue with the fact that that's not being addressed, and they're trying to paint this out as, just something a little different. And again, you're seeing that same pattern where whenever there is an individual who just has some kind of void that they need to fill because they have some kind of internal issues, they always go after black folks. Black folks are always the collateral to whatever problem they have. You saw that with the Charleston shooter. He has his viewpoints about everything, and he felt that he was losing the country and everything. So what happened? Go after the black folks. Go into church and shoot everybody that you just worshipped and prayed with. They done prayed with you and invited you in and probably sang you a song and would have offered you a fish plate, and you went and shot up everybody, and then they took you to Burger King afterwards. You keep seeing that same history. Like, it makes me think of even like the Birmingham bombing where they bombed the church. And the part that makes it even more interesting is sometimes when you see these bombings, a lot of times these white men or these white women that are doing these different crimes, they identify as Christian, but they don't see black Christians in the same element that they see themselves. Even though they're reading from the same Bible and they're allegedly talking to the same God, they don't see them as their spiritual counterparts when it comes to race. Not at all. And so what I find interesting is that historically, lots of places that would pretty much reflect a black place of social luxury, not social luxury, let's say social cultural significance, are always targets. I've always said, like, black people as a collective, we're always targeted from so many different aspects, whether it's them burning down the churches, and when you go back in time, it's still happening today, but when you talk about really like that Jim Crow era, a lot of times when there would be race riots or something, the first thing that they would go and do is burn down the churches and burn down the schools. Because like I said, in a lot of black communities, especially, 15, 60 years ago, the pillars of the community would often be the mosque or be the church, the temple, the school. Sometimes it was the neighborhood grocery store, the restaurant, and all of those things would be the first things that they would burn. They really love to burn down the schools. Make sure that they're not learning anything. Make sure, make sure that they recognize that this is not a game. And I think the worst part about it all is when you go and you burn down like a temple or a mosque or a church, and I don't really care what your views are when it comes to spirituality or religion. Me personally, I just feel that when people are in a place like a church or a mosque or a temple, most of the time, they're on a journey to try to be a better person. They're on a journey to make sense of whatever's going on in this world spiritually. Even if things don't really make sense in the real world reality, they go to a spiritual realm to try to find an inner peace with whatever's happening in their life. Especially when you have people who dedicate their lives to like working in the church or in the mosque or in the temple. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some people that are con artists and they do a lot of foolery and they misguide people and do terrible things. But those who really have their hearts in the right place, I just find it very, very disturbing that people have that kind of evil in them where they will go and they will attack people when they're in a space of humility. Because I think when people are in those establishments, they're at a place of humility where they're willing to put their ego and pride down and really try to seek a better understanding so that they can be better people and inspire other people to be better people and really just have a positive impact on society as a whole. And so when you go and you attack those establishments, like you really got a lot going on. And I just, again, for me, I'm disappointed that they didn't address race, because historically, that's what's always happened with black people as a collective. Like I said, we've always been under, well, y'all don't like when I say we apparently, but I will speak for me and my own. Myself and people who look like myself collectively have always been under attack from all realms. Whether it doesn't even have to just be a building. Sometimes it's even just how we look, whether it's hair, whether it's how we do things, our food, everything. We talked about the young man who got suspended because he had locks. And you just saw this news story with the woman who, I guess she was a fashion model, and they got pissed because she didn't want to wear like the monkey ears and the monkey lips in this fashion show. And the person who was the owner of the clothing line in the fashion show didn't understand the racial epithets that came with such an image because they were so clueless. They knew what they were doing. But anyway, black people collectively have just always been under attack. And you always see cultural establishments, they're always the first things attacked. It's the church, it's the school. I even think of something like the Move bombing, if you remember that, out of Philly, where, you had this organization that were pretty much, they were in this house, the government was like, y'all got to go. And so rather than, finding additional ways to maybe vacate them out of the property, they just dropped a bomb on it. Like, just literally bomb the house. And the worst part is like, so the house gets destroyed, but also city blocks get destroyed and kids get killed. Like, literally everybody dies. Except for this one woman who I felt like she went out like a G because she didn't even want to go to the hospital. They took her to the hospital. She refused to be treated. She was like, I want America to see what's happened to me. So literally, anytime black people have any kind of place of cultural significance, it's always under attack. And I think that's because there's an element of fear, because people recognize that when black people collectively get together and start discussing some of the atrocities that are happening, or they start getting ideas, other groups of people get fearful, because there's this idea that black people are going to be vengeful and go and do to other groups of people what have been done to us. And so I think you always see that, because even if you go back to slavery times, a lot of times on many plantations, even in the churches that were on the plantations, those who were enslaved were not allowed to just have a church service by themselves. There still needed to be an overseer in the church service just to make sure they weren't in there getting any ideas. A lot of times when you go back to like the Jim Crow era or the Civil Rights era, a lot of churches were bombed and burned, and a lot of community centers or restaurants or schools were bombed and burned because those were the meeting places for black people as a collective to talk about whatever was happening in the community. And so seeing this, I just see a pattern. So even when people say, well, racism will die out as the older generation dies, this guy was 22. He's born in the era of that whole post-racial identity they tried to push onto the country after about the Bill Clinton era, where they started saying, everybody's all happy together now and everything is all great and, we're all one happy country. And so you're still seeing the same patterns from 50, 60, 100, 150 years ago. They're not going anywhere because, again, all of this is systematic. It's instilled in each group, each different demographic of people, and it just goes on and it goes on. But I just, it's interesting. I say throw the book at him. And the fact that he would justify it with, I just needed to, get some clouts for my music so I could get some streams. So I'm like, okay, black people, again, at the expense of black people, you want to make the climb. We're always collateral to some foolery all the time. Every single time. So we will see what happens with that. I still think they need to add that element of race in it. It's religious, but there's more to just religion, because I'm not saying he should go burn down his side of town or the churches over there, but it's when you go and you specifically target black churches and you do it at 2 and 3 in the morning, you knew what you were doing. It had nothing to do with religion. You knew exactly what you were trying to do, because again, something like that puts fear in people. It's something that makes people say, okay, I don't want to speak up too much. And that's why I think you have so many people who are very nimble and are afraid to speak out about a lot of things, because they're afraid of the retaliation that may come to them. And so you have a lot of people who stay away from shaking the table, who stay away from anything. Even like the idea that this current administration had when they started talking black identity extremists. And I was like, okay, so now you're going after any black person who calls out the status quo or goes against it. Now all of a sudden you're a black identity extremist. I wonder if they put me on the list. I don't think I had enough following for that to happen, but it is what it is. So we'll see what happens with that. And then some of you have been asking me on social media my 2 cents about Chris Brown and Amber Rose, both with these facial tattoos. Like, if you know, Chris Brown got like a tattoo of like a shoe on the side of his face, and then Amber Rose like tattooed like her children's names on her forehead. People ask me my 2 cents. All I'll say is it's not necessarily something I would do. You know, like, I like my face, so I don't want to put anything on it. And I couldn't always say I liked my face until I was like 20. Like, that's when I started to actually like how I look. So I don't think I would put a tattoo on my face. To be honest, like, I'm not against tattoos, but I don't have any. And I don't have any because I just don't know what I would get a tattoo of. Like, I change my mind about everything all the time. So I just know that a tattoo is probably not good for me, because whatever I might have put on a Monday, by Tuesday, I'm like, what did I just do? And now I'm stuck with it. So I was never a big tattoo person, but, you know, to each his own, let alone a tattoo on your face. But they live in a different world than myself. You know, they do things differently. So let them do them. That's all I'll say. Anyway, moving on. And then this story about the teacher coming out of the Bronx who sexually assaulted one of their students. Her name was Dory Myers, and she was convicted of sexual assault against one of her students who was 14. She was pretty much giving him oral favors, long story short. And rather than her being given any jail time, they gave her a 10-year probation sentence, and she also got to keep her teaching certificate. Now, I don't know where they do that at, but normally, this is just a question. Wouldn't that person normally have to register as a sex offender and then stay away from children? You know, I'm like, at least that's how I always thought things worked. And the bit that just gets me is the fact that they get to keep the teaching certificate. So they get to stay around children and continue to be around them. And so it makes me question a lot of things. The biggest question for me is, I wish I knew the race of the victim. Because in my head, and this is just my opinion, and I'm not going to push this off as fact because I don't know, but I am convinced that the student, especially if it was a male, was a black male. And I say that because a lot of times when it comes to black youth, whether it's girls or boys, they are not looked at as children once they reach a certain age. They're not looked at as children once their body begins to develop. They're not looked at as children once they have a certain demeanor about them. And you've seen that time and time again, whether it's Tamir Rice being shot within 2 seconds because the police believed he was an adult, even though the kid was, I don't even think he was 5 feet tall. But you saw that. You saw Jordan Davis get killed because the guy feared for his life because, you know, Jordan Davis and the friends were playing music in the car, and, you know, they told him to mind his business and he was afraid. So, you know, just shoot him to the car and go get some pizza afterwards. You know, black youth are not looked at as children. And a lot of times, even when you talk about like sexual assault victims, especially black girls, they're always looked at as it's their fault because they're the aggressor. And it goes back to what we talked about as far as black bodies and black women, especially back in the day, being seen as these overtly sexual beings that just went after everybody. And so I'm sure the verbiage that was pushed in that courtroom was that this was some hormonal teenage boy, and it was a rite of passage for him, and his boys bragged about it, and that's how the teacher got caught, and she's really a victim. I know for sure that that's probably the narrative they pushed in that courtroom, and they tried to push that. And again, it just goes back to the fact that with black youth, they're never looked at as youth. Now, again, I don't know the race of this child, but listen, this is the Bronx. The Bronx have not been that gentrified yet, all right? So if the kid wasn't black, he was at least Latino. That's all I'm saying. Or she. But it's extremely just, because then here's the flip side. You remember when Ryan Lochte got in trouble at the Olympics in 2016 when he went to Brazil and acted a fool? And then the news outlets were saying, oh, well, you know, him and his boys, they were just some 32-year-old kids just out there having fun. I said 32-year-old kids. 32. Now, 32 was still young, but that's the older end of young. And it's not young enough to be mixed up with, you know, the adolescent demographic of people who were 16, 17, 18, 19, even 20. I think not. Like, they really tried it. And even with Jerry Sandusky with the Penn State whole child sexual abuse case, and they were talking about the things he was doing in the shower with the kids, and then his justification was, we were just in there playing around. I'm like, sir, you're like 70. Ain't no playing around. You got bad knees, gout, and everything else like that. You don't walk within the same essence of the innocence of children. You don't. And so again, you see the difference with how black males and black boys and black girls are treated in comparison to white counterparts, and even when it talks about the aggressor and the victim. Because if the tables were turned, if this was a black teacher and a white student, that teacher would have been under the jail. There would have been a whole hashtag in the morning. If Nancy Grace still had a show, she would have been on cardiac arrest. They would have had to have her on life support with the cameras rolling. If Dr. Drew would have had a whole discussion, it would have been on Don Lemon and everybody else that got a show. Fox News would have ate it up. It would have been the topic of discussion. There is absolutely no way that teacher would have just been given probation and still get to teach. That's the part that's getting me, is the fact that they still get to teach. And it's so funny that she's a history teacher. I was like, So, the way privilege works in this country, that privilege. I said it. Nothing but privilege. Like, she should have been under the jail. I'm sorry. Like, there's no justification in the part, again, keeping that teaching certificate. The amount of power that is given to certain groups of people when they do foolery. She must have cried some serious tears in that courtroom. They bought the tears or something ridiculous. Moving on. This last story I want to cover is about the student Jay Butler, so I'm going to read a few details and then we'll talk. Jay Butler and his Eastern Illinois University swim teammates were returning from a championship tournament last year in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, when their bus driver pulled off Interstate 80 near a rest stop in East Moline, Illinois. It was shortly after 8 p.m. and Mr. Butler, then 19, got out of the bus, which was headed to Charleston, Illinois, about 190 miles south of Chicago, to stretch his legs and snap a selfie in front of a "Buckle Up, It's the Law" road sign. He was walking back to the bus when several law enforcement vehicles, their lights flashing, pulled up and officers appeared with their guns drawn and pointed at him, according to court records. Mr. Butler, who was the only black student among the more than 30 on the bus, was surprised and confused but knew what to do, court records said. He instantly stopped, put his hands up, dropped the cell phone that was in his hand, and dropped to his knees. At least one officer had his knee pushed into Mr. Butler's back, and another was pressing down on his neck, court records said. One officer pressed his handgun to Mr. Butler's forehead and warned that if Mr. Butler kept moving, the officer would blow his head off. The court records continued. And so there's a few more details that keep going and going, but long story short, he's suing that police department. And one of the details that came out was the police were saying that they were looking for a suspect and he fit the description. Apparently the suspect was a black male that had went and did something violent with a gun, as far as flashing a gun out somewhere, something crazy like that. And so it opens up the conversation about the experience of black people who either live in areas or end up in areas where there's not a lot of representation when it comes to people who come from their same demographic. And I say that because what happens is a lot of times there's some kind of random incident, and then literally it's pretty much there's a bounty out on anybody who fits the description. And that always means pretty much that you're just black. It goes back to that story about Bethany Storrell, which it was one of the very first videos I ever did. And I told that story a few times on this channel, but the woman, Bethany Storrell, she was in Vancouver, Washington. Not to be confused with Vancouver, BC, but Vancouver, Washington, which is this really, really small town. And so she throws acid on her face and goes on this whole spree about how she was attacked by a black woman. Like a black woman came and threw acid on her face. And so there's this whole manhunt for this black suspect. And for black people who lived in that region at the time, there weren't a lot of them, so they all felt like they were targets. No matter where they went, whether they were in the store, everybody's kind of staring at them because they're wondering, I wonder if that's the person. And so that's literally the experience about for a lot of people who are in, they end up in areas where they aren't a part of a majority collective. And so with that case, it just made me even have a flashback to my own experience when I was met with the taser, when, there was somebody in my neighborhood that was breaking into houses. This is back when I still lived in Washington State. And then next, I get pulled over with like 4 or 5 squad cars, and I'm happy I didn't sneeze. I might not be here to talk about the story, but again, it just goes to show that when it comes to how black people, both black men and black women, are dealt with by law enforcement, there's a total double standard, because people are going to say, oh, well, if he fit the description of somebody who was armed and dangerous, that's the protocol they have to follow. But we've seen so many videos where you have an aggressor who happens to be white and they got a sword or they got a knife or they got a gun or they got some kind of weapon and they're flashing it and pointing at the officer and trying to fight the officer, and they won't put the gun down. And the officers, they're walking and using their words and trying to negotiate and everything else like that. But then when it comes to other groups of people, let's just get the guns out, put the knee in the neck and let's shoot. Let's get it. It's the Wild West out here. And so again, you're seeing that double standard. So I hope Jaylan I hope they write the check. Send that boy the check. And it's a traumatizing experience. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a really bad experience with the police, but once you have one, you're kind of shook for a really long time. I remember after that incident, anytime there was a police car behind me, I was like paranoid for the longest because I was always afraid, like, man, just, I don't know, it's a really horrible experience. And for him, you have a gun pressed to your head. And the worst part is he complied. He put his hands up, he got down on the ground. And again, I think that's when that whole element of ego and pride kicks in as well. A lot of these officers, there's like this sense of euphoria, and there's like these endorphins that just get released when they get to put a gun to somebody's head, or when they get to be overtly violent against somebody who's already in a position of like submissiveness. I don't want to say servitude, but they're already in a position where their hands are behind their back or they're on the ground, or you see it all the time. And it's also been normalized in our media. Think of all of the TV shows that, like the Law and Order SVUs and all those shows, where anytime, or even the movies, anytime the suspect or the person that's being looked at did something wrong, you constantly see the cops slamming their head in the table while they're doing the questioning. And it's become so indoctrinated that it's not even looked at as a questionable practice. It's just the way things are. It's just how things always go. It's just the way it is. It's funny, side note, there was this little interesting little Twitter argument I got into earlier today, because of course it's President's Day, and somebody had made this tweet about like George Washington, owning slaves, and somebody responded, well, that's just the way things were at the time, and he did, free them after he died. It was in his will. And I'm like, you know what, as a country, America's history is so saturated in oppressive and vile antics and practices, both the past and the present, that things that are inhumane are seen as normalized, and people will protect those entities all in the name of celebrating a legacy. And so with that, it was kind of like, okay, you mean to tell me that you want to paint George Washington to be this great man because he decided that once he died his slaves could be free? And really, in reality, if we want to talk about it, none of the slaves ended up being free except for one immediately. One was freed, but the rest were still enslaved for decades due to the laws that were in place while he was president. So it's kind of like the way that people will warp history and see things. Like not we, I know y'all don't like the word we, but society, especially within America, there's just been so many atrocities that are so normalized and that are just routine, that when you challenge it and go against the status quo and really call things out as you see it, people don't even know how to process it because it's just so normalized. I'll always remember having this conversation with somebody, and I was talking about how I don't like the things that we do in the Middle East. I don't like how we constantly go and we've just disrupted the lives. This we again, I'm trying to stop saying we, but the United States has gone and just disrupted the lives of so many people with bombings and the drones and this, that, and the third, and it's all in the name of democracy and everything else like that. And the person was telling me, well, in order for us in the United States to have the things we have, sometimes we have to do things that are unpopular just to keep the world the way it is. And I'm like, again, so you're that comfortable in the idea of white supremacy and imperialism that you're fine with the children and the babies being bombed as long as you get to get your Starbucks. That's what you're telling me. Okay. It's a lot. One thing I do want to close out on, because I do want to address this. If you've noticed, for those who are subscribers, I've been taking a lot of breaks. And I'm not telling everything, but I'm going to try to be a little transparent. So I'm dealing with like a health issue. And the worst part about it is that we don't know what is actually wrong. So I've been kind of back and forth with like CT scans and everything like that. And the problem is gradually getting worse, but it's not anything to panic about yet, but in the future it could be. And so what's been happening is, between going back and forth with like all the appointments and everything, it's just a mentally draining experience to go through when you don't really know what's wrong. And some days I'm not in the mood to do anything in regards to YouTube, mainly because they're also saying, okay, you need to like keep your stress levels down and really just, do other things that keep you happy. And so as somebody who works with youth, sometimes by the time I'm done with my kids, I don't have energy to come in and do YouTube, because we talk about a lot of really heavy topics. And one of the effects of having a channel where you cover heavy subject matter is, even though there's going to be people who agree with you, you also have an army of people who don't agree, which is why when I read comments, I normally only read the comments the first 12 hours after I do a video, and then I'm like, let me stop looking, because at this point, anything after 12 hours is usually not the subscribers, it's everybody else. And so for my own peace of mind, I've just been taking some breaks just to kind of get my head straight. I'm still doing things that I enjoy doing. Like really my therapy is just really making music. I love to make music. Not really the singing part, but actually just making the actual music. And so I don't think anybody has anything to worry about. I go back for some more tests in about 3 months, but they're trying to just make sure that everything's right. The good thing is that because I'm so young, if it is what they think it is, I'll be able to bounce back after they handle, and do things that they do. But it is something that it clutters your mind. And so it makes it really hard to concentrate and do some of these more serious videos sometimes. And I get in these spaces where I'm like, I need a break. And so I've just been taking some breaks. And so I ask that you just bear with me because again, one of the things I've been learning with this whole YouTube thing is that, okay, people actually really do value what I have to say. And it's greatly appreciated. I really enjoy it because I used to not think that was the case a few years ago until I started really getting, the responses that I'm getting, and people would start, tagging me on social media about different stories, or they want my opinion on something, or just even the support that I get on this channel when we talk about topics that are really unpopular. And so I don't want people to think that I'm just like taking this channel for granted and I just get to it when I get to it and that's what it is. It's just like, no, there's a lot going on. So I'm good though, so don't worry. No worries, folks. So I'd say put some good energy out there. Let's just cross our fingers and hope everything is good. But I will kind of keep you guys updated as I get more details. And then finally, when everything blows over, I can really tell you about everything. But right now, because I still want to have some of my personal life, I just don't want to put everything out there. But that's all. Anyway, I'm actually happy I was able to get 2 videos out because I knew y'all gonna cuss me out if all y'all got after 2 weeks was a Shaka Khan video. So anyway, share your 2 cents. I'm out. Subscribe.